Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Civil War in the United States, which was the most tragic event in the history of the nation. Believe it or not, more Americans died in the Civil War than in all wars since. If you've seen the movie Gone with the Wind, you'll have some idea what it was like. Why did it all start? People in the southern states felt that the Northerners were trying to take away some of their rights, and particularly the right to keep slaves. They depended on slave labor in the cotton fields, and many of them would have been ruined if slavery was abolished. Besides that, Southerners didn't like the fact that most of the laws were made in Washington by Northerners, and that the North was far more developed economically. Lincoln was elected president in 1860. After that, 7 Southern states withdrew from the Union, and in 1861 they became known as the Confederate States of America. The Union sent a battalion of soldiers to Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and the Confederate Army attacked them. That was in April 1861. At first, the Confederates won most of the battles, but gradually the Union began to push them back. Finally, in 1865 they surrendered, and the war was over. In those 4 terrible years, over 500,000 Americans were killed, and many cities were destroyed. The slaves were freed, but some white people continued to suppress the blacks. President Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, just after the war ended. The bitterness between the North and South lasted for many, many years. Listening for details. Classroom lecture.
Today I want to tell you about immigration to the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries. The U.S. is a land of immigrants. Its people have ancestors from all over the world. You can see this just by looking at the names of some famous Americans. Kennedy from Ireland, Kissinger from Germany, DuPont from France, Fukuyama, a Japanese name. Or how about restaurants? There are thousands of ethnic restaurants in big cities like New York and Los Angeles. Americans eat pizza from Italy, tacos from Mexico, curry from India, sushi from Japan. The first big wave of immigrants in the 19th century was made up of Catholics from Ireland. Between 1847 and 1854, over 1.5 million Irish people came to the U.S. The Transcontinental Railroad was built by Irish laborers working from the East Coast and by Chinese workers from the West. After the Civil War, many Germans came. They brought the hamburger, which is now regarded as a typical American fast food. Then, in the early 1900s, many Italians and Russians arrived. That was the biggest wave of immigrants. After that, laws were made to restrict immigration.
Strategies for listening. Prediction, Part 1. Exercise 1. 1.
Excuse me, do you have change for a 10,000 yen bill?
2.
Which bus do I take to get here, please?
3.
Do you have the English version of this?
4.
Do you have these in my size?
5.
I can't find my son anywhere. Has anyone found him?
Strategies for listening. Prediction, Part 1. Exercise 2. Example. I'm hungry. Let's have something to eat. 1.
I'm tired. We've been walking all day. Let's...
2.
My watch has stopped. Do you know?
3.
It's hot in here. Mind if I...
4.
It's too far to walk. Let's...
5.
This place looks very expensive. Maybe we'd better...
1.
I'm tired. We've been walking all day. Let's take a rest.
2.
My watch has stopped. Do you know what time it is?
3,
It's hot in here. Mind if I open a window?
4,
It's too far to walk. Let's take a cab.
5.
This place looks very expensive. Maybe we'd better go somewhere else.
Responding. Responding to a lecture. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the beginnings of the relations between the United States and Japan. As you know, the main relationship between Japan and the United States started in 1853, when Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Japan with his black ships, as you call them in Japan. The two main points I want to make are these. First, there were many interesting contacts between the U.S. and Japan even before Perry. And second, I want to tell you some of the main reasons why the American government wanted to make contact with Japan. Now, as you know, many European countries had contact with Japan even from the middle of the 16th century. There were Portuguese and Spanish and the English and the Dutch. But by the middle of the 17th century, all the Europeans had been driven out of Japan except for the Dutch, who were confined to Nagasaki. Now, of course, at this time, the United States was not even a nation yet. Does anybody know the year the United States became a nation? That's right, 1776, the middle of the 18th century. By this time, the Japanese government's seclusion policy, I'll write it on the board, seclusion, was firmly in place. Now, as far as we know, the first American to come to Japan was a ship's captain named John Kendrick, who arrived in 1791. Now, please remember the year. After that time, a few American ships visited Nagasaki. I won't bore you with the details. But after 1809, there was no contact between America and Japan for 30 years. The next serious effort to establish contact came in 1837, and there was another in 1846. And finally, the most important, the one which was to change Japan's destiny completely, in 1853. Besides these official contacts, there were some interesting personal contacts. For example, probably the first English teacher in Japan came from America in 1848. His name was Ranald McDonald, but no relation to Ronald McDonald, the clown character at McDonald's hamburger restaurants. Actually, he stayed in Japan for 7 months teaching English in Nagasaki. But he could have become a rich man if he had set up a hamburger restaurant instead. Of course, you want to know why the American government. Listening variety. A short story.
In the year 1884, Sarah Winchester, a very rich woman whose husband had died, bought a house in San Jose, a city in California. She believed that the house was filled with ghosts, who gave her advice about changing it. So every night she would get advice from the ghosts, and the next morning she would give instructions to the workmen about the changes to be made. She had many, many workers. There were 18 carpenters, 12 gardeners, and many painters, plumbers, and others. For 38 years they worked all day and all night every day of the year. The problem was that the ghosts kept changing their minds about what they wanted. They gave Sarah Winchester different advice every day. So the carpenters would build something one day and tear it down the next. They took old doors out and put new ones in. When Sarah Winchester bought the house, it had only 9 rooms. Today, the house has 160 rooms, 2,000 doors, and 10,000 windows. It has 6 kitchens and 13 bathrooms. There are many secret passageways, and many of the staircases lead nowhere. One staircase has 40 steps, with each step only 2 inches high. The house became so complex that even Sarah Winchester had to use a map to find her way around in it. Sarah Winchester invited the ghosts to be her guests for dinner every night. Although she seemed to be polite to the ghosts, she was very much afraid of them. She slept in a different room each night so that they wouldn't find her, and in fact, they never did.